If your engine keeps losing oil, but you never see a puddle under the car, don't let anybody scare you into an engine rebuild in the first 5 minutes. I'm serious. I've been around enough shops to know how this usually goes. Customer comes in and says, my oil keeps dropping between changes, the car still starts fine, it still pulls fine, no warning light, no big leak on the driveway. Maybe just a little blue-gray smoke once in a while in the morning, or when they hit the gas hard. And almost immediately, somebody says the words that empty your wallet fast. Worn piston rings, engine's tired, probably needs a rebuild. Now listen to me carefully. Sometimes that diagnosis is real, but not nearly as often as people think. Because excessive oil consumption does not automatically mean your engine is finished. And one of the biggest mistakes drivers make is assuming that if oil is disappearing, the damage has to be deep inside the engine. That is not how this works. In a lot of cases, oil starts disappearing through smaller problems first. Problems that are cheaper to check, cheaper to fix, and more importantly, problems that get ignored because too many people jump straight to the most expensive conclusion. That's what this video is about. I'm going to show you the 3-step method that smart mechanics use to sort this out in the right order. Not the flashy order, not the profitable order, the logical order. Because before you pay thousands for rings, seals, or a rebuild, you need to answer one question first. Is your engine really worn out? Or is it just being misdiagnosed? Quick disclaimer before we start, the tips and guides in this video are for educational purposes only. Every vehicle is different, so please use this information at your own risk. We are not responsible for any damage or injury that may occur. When in doubt, always consult a professional mechanic. Here's the expensive lie drivers hear first. If your car is burning oil, the piston rings must be worn out. Sounds reasonable, right? Oil is disappearing. The engine has miles on it. So the problem must be deep inside the engine. That's exactly why so many people get talked into the wrong repair. Because a lot of shops do not diagnose oil consumption. They label it, they hear the symptom, they picture the worst case failure, and they start building the estimate from there. That is not diagnosis. That's guesswork with a labor rate attached to it. And I'll be honest with you, years ago, I made that mistake too. Somebody came in topping off oil every few weeks. And if the mileage was high enough, it was easy to assume the engine was just worn. Easy to say, rings. Easy to say, rebuild. Easy to say, the car wasn't worth saving. But the more of these cases you see, the more you realize something uncomfortable. A lot of engines that burn oil are not actually asking for a rebuild first. They're asking for someone to slow down and check the obvious paths before condemning the hard parts. That's where people lose money, not because the engine was beyond saving, but because nobody bothered to ask the right question first. Where is the oil actually getting into the combustion process? Because once you understand that, the whole conversation changes. So let's make this simple. If engine oil is disappearing and you don't see a clear leak outside the engine, then in most real-world cases, that oil is getting burned through one of 3 paths. Not 10, not 20, 3. And if you don't sort out these 3 paths first, you can waste a lot of money chasing the wrong repair. Path number 1, valve stem seals. These little seals sit at the top of the valves, and their job is to control how much oil stays in the valve train area and how much is allowed near the valve guides. When they get hard, brittle, or worn with age, oil can slowly drip down along the valve stem and enter the combustion chamber. That's why this type of problem often shows up after the car sits overnight. You start the engine in the morning, and for a few seconds, you get that faint blue-gray smoke. Then it clears up, and the car drives normally. Path number 2, the PCV system. This is the one people ignore all the time. The PCV system is supposed to relieve crankcase pressure and route vapors back through the intake in a controlled way. But when that system is clogged, restricted, or stuck, pressure builds where it shouldn't. And once that happens, the engine starts pushing oil mist into the intake path and burning it without leaving a nice, obvious leak on the ground. So the oil disappears, but nothing looks dramatic from the outside. Path number 3, the wrong oil viscosity. This one sounds boring, but it matters. If the oil is too thin for what that engine actually needs, especially on a higher mileage engine or in hotter conditions, it can slip past worn clearances, seals, and ring gaps more easily. That doesn't automatically mean the engine is destroyed. It means the oil may not be helping the engine the way the correct spec should. So that's the real picture. Valve seals, PCV system, wrong viscosity. And one of those three gets missed so often that people end up paying for major engine work when the first check should have cost almost nothing. And that brings us to the part almost nobody checks first, even though they should. The PCV system. If you've never heard anyone talk about it, that's exactly the problem. Because when drivers hear burning oil, they picture worn pistons, bad rings, tired cylinders, old engine. They imagine damage deep inside the block. What they do not picture is a small ventilation system quietly failing and creating the pressure problem that starts the whole mess. But that's exactly what can happen. Your engine is not supposed to build uncontrolled pressure inside the crankcase. As the pistons move, as heat builds, and as combustion gases sneak past the rings in small amounts, that pressure has to go somewhere. The PCV system is there to manage it. It gives those vapors a controlled path out, routes them back into the intake side, and keeps the inside of the engine from turning into a pressure cooker. When that system is working, the engine breathes the way it's supposed to. When it's not working, the pressure starts building where it should not. And once crankcase pressure gets too high, oil mist does not just sit there politely. It gets pushed, it gets carried. It gets forced into places you don't want it to go through the intake path, into the combustion process, and out the tailpipe a little at a time. That's why these cases confuse people. There's no big puddle on the driveway. There's no dramatic failure. The engine may still idle fine. The car may still feel normal, but the dipstick keeps dropping. That's the trap. Because a driver sees disappearing oil and assumes the engine must be worn out. A lazy diagnosis hears the same symptom and jumps straight to piston rings. Meanwhile, the real problem may be a restricted PCV valve, a stuck valve, a cracked hose, a clogged passage, or a ventilation path that simply isn't pulling the vapor the way it should anymore. And if that's the issue, you do not start with a rebuild. You start with the pressure path. Because if the engine can't breathe right, everything after that becomes misleading. And that is why the first real step in this method is not tearing the engine apart. It's checking the cheapest hidden cause first. So here is step one in this method. Before you blame rings, before you blame valve seals, before you let anybody talk you into major engine work, you check the PCV path first. Why? Because this is one of the cheapest checks on the whole car. And if it's restricted, stuck, or not flowing the way it should, it can make a healthy engine look a lot worse than it really is. Now, the goal here is simple. You are not trying to become a master technician in 5 minutes. You are trying to answer one question. Is the engine pulling crankcase vapor the way it's supposed to, or is pressure building where it shouldn't? On many engines, that starts with a basic PCV valve, or PCV hose check. With the engine idling, you inspect the PCV hose and valve path. On engines where the PCV valve is accessible and serviceable, you disconnect it carefully and check for vacuum at the correct point. You should feel that the system is actually pulling. Not violently, but clearly. If there's little to no vacuum, if the hose feels dead, or worse, if you feel pressure pushing the wrong way, that is a red flag. That tells you the engine may not be venting properly, and if it's not venting properly, oil mist can start going places it should not go. Now let me say this clearly. This is not the part where you act reckless around a running engine. If the layout is cramped, if the hose is buried, if the valve is integrated into the cover, or if you don't know what you're touching, stop and look up the service layout first. The point is not to turn a simple check into a broken connector or a vacuum leak. But if the PCV system is accessible, and it fails this first basic check, that is where your money should go first. Not into a rebuild, not into replacing half the engine, into restoring the ventilation path the engine depends on. Because if the PCV system is the real cause and you skip it, every diagnosis after that gets dirtier, more expensive, and more misleading. But let's say the PCV system checks out. The next step is where a lot of people finally start separating top-end oil burning from deeper engine wear. And the clue usually shows up in the first few seconds of the day. So here is step 2. You read the smoke pattern correctly. Not emotionally, not dramatically, and definitely not like every puff of smoke means your engine is finished. Because smoke tells a story, but only if you pay attention to when it appears. This is where a lot of drivers get misled. They see a little blue-gray smoke once, panic, and assume the worst. Or they never see smoke under normal driving, so they assume the oil can't possibly be getting burned. Both of those reactions are wrong. What matters is the pattern. If the car sits overnight, then gives you a brief blue-gray puff when you start it in the morning, and then the smoke clears up, that points your suspicion upward toward valve stem seals. Why? Because while the engine sits, a small amount of oil can seep down past hardened or aging valve seals and collect where it shouldn't. Then, on startup, that oil gets burned off in the first few seconds. After that, the smoke disappears, the car runs normally, and people convince themselves it was nothing. But it was not nothing, it was a clue. Now compare that to a different pattern. Let's say the engine starts clean in the morning. No visible smoke at idle. But when you accelerate hard, merge onto the highway, or load the engine going uphill, now you see blue smoke behind you. That is a different conversation. Because smoke under load is a more serious sign. It can point toward deeper oil control problems, including ring-related wear or cylinder sealing issues that are harder to talk your way around. That does not mean you declare the engine dead on the spot. It means your suspicion level goes up, and this is where I want you to stay disciplined. Smoke is a clue. Smoke is not a verdict. A cold start puff does not automatically prove valve seals. A hard acceleration cloud does not automatically prove rings. But each pattern tells you where to look next, and just as important, where not to waste money first. So do this the smart way. Let the car sit overnight. Start it cold. Watch the exhaust for the first 20 to 30 seconds. Then pay attention later under hard throttle. Not once, a few times. Because one random puff means less than a repeatable pattern. If the pattern keeps pointing to the top end, you do not jump straight to a rebuild story. If the pattern looks heavier under load, you stop pretending oil viscosity alone will save you. That's how you use smoke the right way. Not to make a final diagnosis, but to narrow the battlefield. And now we get to the third mistake that quietly makes oil consumption worse, even on engines that are still mechanically decent: the oil itself. Now, here is step 3. Before you blame the engine, you verify the oil grade, viscosity, and spec that are actually in the car. And I'll tell you right now, this is where a lot of drivers accidentally make the problem worse while thinking they're doing the right thing. They hear the engine is using oil, so they go buy whatever full synthetic is on sale, or they stick with the same oil they've always used without checking whether it still makes sense for that engine, that mileage, that climate, and that manufacturer spec. That is how you end up feeding the wrong oil to an engine that is already right on the edge. Here's the simple version. If the oil is too thin for the engine's real needs, it can pass worn clearances, tired seals, and small gaps more easily. That means more oil gets where it should not go, and more of it gets burned without ever leaving you a dramatic leak on the floor. So the driver says, "My engine is getting worse." Maybe, but sometimes the engine is not suddenly getting worse. Sometimes the oil choice is exposing a weakness that was manageable before. Now let me be careful here, because this is where people get extreme. This is not me telling you to pour thick oil into everything and hope for a miracle. That is lazy advice. Go too thick, especially in the wrong engine or cold conditions, and now you create a different set of problems. Slower flow on cold starts, poor lubrication where it matters most, and a false sense that you fixed something when you really just masked it. That is not smart maintenance. That is gambling. What you do instead is this. You check the manufacturer's oil spec first. You check the recommended viscosity range. You check what is actually in the engine now. And then you ask a more honest question. Is this engine running an oil that is correct for its design, its mileage, and the conditions it lives in? Because a lot of higher mileage cars end up with one of two bad habits. Either the owner keeps using a thin oil that the engine is clearly consuming faster than it should, or they jump to some random fix oil without understanding whether it even matches the original spec. Both mistakes cost money. The first one keeps the consumption problem alive. The second one confuses the diagnosis, and this is the part many people miss. If the oil grade is wrong, you can't fairly judge what the engine is doing. You're measuring the engine through the wrong fluid. So before you panic, before you say rings, before you say the engine is tired, verify the oil. Because if the PCV system was weak, and the oil is also too thin for the real-world condition of that engine, those two problems together can make a decent engine look a lot more worn out than it really is. That is why this method works in this order. First, fix the breathing path. Then, read the smoke pattern. Then, verify the oil. Not because that sounds clever, because that order keeps you from paying for the wrong repair first. But now we need to talk about where people lose the most money of all, when they skip this logic and let somebody sell them a story instead of a diagnosis. Now let's talk about where drivers waste the most money. Not when the engine is actually worn out. When the engine might not be worn out, but people start replacing big expensive things before checking the cheap causes first. This happens all the time. A car starts using oil. The owner gets nervous. A shop hears burning oil and jumps straight to the dramatic explanation. And suddenly the conversation is not about testing. It's about estimates. That is how people end up paying for stories instead of answers. Here are the 3 biggest money traps. Money trap number 1. Replacing hard parts before checking the PCV system. This is the dumbest expensive mistake in the whole chain. If the engine cannot vent crankcase pressure correctly, oil consumption can get distorted fast. But instead of checking that pressure path first, people start talking about valve seals, piston rings, teardown labor, maybe even engine replacement. That is backwards. You do not start with the repair that makes the most money for the shop. You start with the repair that explains the symptom most logically and costs the least to verify. And that means the PCV path gets checked first. Money trap number 2. Treating high mileage oil like a diagnosis. I'm not against high mileage oil. It has its place. But some people use it like a magic eraser. The engine burns oil, so they pour in high mileage oil and tell themselves they handled it. No. Maybe you softened a symptom. Maybe you slowed it a little. Maybe you bought some time. But if the PCV system is restricted, if the oil spec is wrong, or if the smoke pattern is pointing to something more serious, high mileage oil is not a diagnosis. It is not a test result. It is not proof of anything. It is just one product choice. And a lot of people waste months doing that instead of figuring out what the engine is actually telling them. Money trap number 3. Letting someone say worn piston rings without numbers. This is the line I want you to remember. If a shop says the engine has worn rings, ask them for the compression test numbers. Not a feeling, not a guess, not, we've seen this before. The numbers, if they're really confident the rings are the problem, they should be able to show you test results that support a mechanical sealing issue, and if the next step is thousands of dollars, you have every right to ask for proof before you agree to anything. Because this is where drivers get trapped. They hear a serious-sounding diagnosis. They assume the shop must know. They panic because the car needs oil every few weeks, and they approve a repair that may have skipped the cheapest checks entirely. That is exactly what this method is trying to prevent. Not by pretending every oil-burning engine is healthy, but by forcing the diagnosis into the correct order. Check the breathing path, read the smoke, verify the oil, then and only then start talking seriously about deeper mechanical wear. Because once you understand that order, you stop being the easiest person in the room to upsell. Now, let's be honest about where this method works best. Because the worst thing you can do with a video like this is walk away thinking every oil-burning engine can be saved with one valve, one oil change, and a little optimism. That's not what I'm telling you. This method works best in the middle zone. Not on a brand new engine with no real issue, and not on a completely worn-out engine that is already past the point of maintenance fixes. It works best on the daily driver cars most people actually own. The ones with some mileage, the ones that still run well, the ones that don't smoke like a chimney all day, the ones that use just enough oil to make you nervous, but not enough to make the engine feel obviously dead. That sweet spot usually looks like this. The engine is using maybe half a liter to 1 liter every 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers. You don't see a major leak on the ground. The car still starts, idles, and drives normally. Maybe you get a little blue-gray smoke on cold start, or occasionally under load. And the mileage is high enough that age-related wear is possible, but not automatically catastrophic. That is where this method earns its keep. Because in that zone, a clogged PCV system, a bad ventilation path, aging valve seals, or the wrong oil can still make a big difference in what you see at the dipstick. And that matters. Because if you catch it there, you're not trying to resurrect a dead engine. You're trying to stop a manageable problem from being misread, ignored, or made worse. That's the whole idea behind this logic. Not magic, not miracle cures, not pretending old engines don't wear. It's about recognizing that a lot of engines start burning oil before they're mechanically finished. And if you act early while the symptoms are still moderate, while the pressure path is still fixable, while the oil choice still matters, you can often reduce the consumption enough to get back to sane ownership. Maybe not perfection, but sane. Less topping off, less panic, less chance of paying for the wrong repair. That's where this method has real value. It helps you in the window before everything turns into hard part failure. But that also means we need to draw a hard line, because there is a point where this stops being maintenance logic and starts being real mechanical damage. So let's draw the line clearly, because there is a point where this method is useful. And there is a point where you stop trying to outsmart the problem and go get the engine tested properly. Here's when I would stop leaning on this method alone and move straight to real mechanical verification. First, compression is low. If the cylinders are testing weak, now you're no longer talking about a simple ventilation issue, a mild top-end leak, or an oil choice mistake. Now, you may be dealing with a sealing problem inside the engine that no PCV valve and no oil change is going to fix. That matters, because once cylinder pressure is low enough, the engine is telling you something more serious is happening than it just uses a little oil. Second, leak down numbers are bad. Compression tells you something is weak. Leak down starts telling you where the weakness is. If the engine is leaking too much past the rings or through the valves, that is not a maintenance discussion anymore. That is a wear discussion. And wear has to be measured, not guessed. Third, the oil consumption is extreme. I'm not talking about topping off a little between services. I'm talking about the kind of oil loss that forces you to carry bottles in the trunk and check the dipstick constantly because the engine can eat through oil fast enough to become dangerous. At that point, you are no longer trying to fine-tune a moderate problem. You are managing an active failure. Fourth, the smoke is heavy and continuous. A small puff on cold start is one conversation. A constant blue cloud behind the car is a different one entirely. If it smokes all the time, idle, cruise, acceleration, deceleration, you have moved past watch the pattern and into the engine needs real testing now. Because once the smoke is constant, the engine is no longer being subtle. It is telling you oil control has broken down badly enough that the problem is now obvious from the outside. Fifth, the oil looks wrong in a way that points to a different failure altogether. If the oil is turning milky, creamy, or strangely discolored, stop right there. That is not a normal oil consumption conversation anymore. Now, you may be dealing with coolant contamination or another major failure that belongs in an entirely different diagnostic path. And this is where people get themselves in trouble. They hear about a cheaper method, they hear about PCV, they hear about oil grade, and they try to force every engine into the easy fix category. That is not what I'm telling you to do. I'm telling you to use this method where it makes sense early enough to help, but not so late that you're lying to yourself. Because smart maintenance is not about denying damage. It's about knowing the difference between a manageable cause and a worn-out engine that has already crossed the line. And once you understand where that line is, the next step becomes much easier. You stop asking, what's the miracle fix? And you start asking the only question that really matters, am I in the fix-it-now zone, the monitor-it zone, or the shop-now zone? So here's the framework I want you to leave this video with. Not a theory, not a bunch of random tips, a simple decision system. Because once you understand what zone you're in, the panic starts to go away. Zone 1, fix it now. This is where the method has the most value. You're losing a noticeable amount of oil, but not at a catastrophic rate. The car still runs well. There's no heavy constant smoke. No obvious sign yet that the engine is mechanically finished. And when you check things, you find something concrete. Maybe the PCV system isn't pulling correctly. Maybe the hose is bad. Maybe the valve is restricted. Maybe the oil in the engine doesn't match what the engine should be running. Maybe the smoke pattern points more toward top-end seepage than full-blown bottom-end wear. That is the moment to act, not later. Not after 6 more months of topping off oil and hoping. Right then. Because this is the zone where small corrections still have leverage. Fix the breathing path. Put the right oil in the engine. Stop feeding the problem the wrong conditions. That is how you keep a moderate oil consumption issue from turning into a major one. Zone 2. Monitor it carefully. This is the zone a lot of people skip, and that's a mistake. They either ignore the problem completely, or they panic and jump straight to the worst conclusion. The smart move is often to fix the obvious issues first. Then measure what changed. Not guess, measure. After you correct the PCV problem or verify the oil spec, you monitor the dipstick the right way. Same ground, same method, same interval. Check the oil consistently every few hundred kilometers, not randomly whenever you remember. Keep a note. Track how much the engine is actually using, because this is where the truth shows up. If the oil consumption drops meaningfully, then good. That tells you the earlier steps mattered. It tells you the engine may not have been asking for a teardown at all. It may have been asking for basic corrections that should have happened sooner. But if nothing changes, now you stop telling yourself the easy answer is working. Now you move to real testing. That is what monitoring is for, not to delay the truth, to reveal it. Zone 3, shop now. This is where you stop playing around. Compression is low, leak down is bad, the smoke is heavy and constant, the oil loss is severe. The engine is crossing from problem into failure. That is not the zone for YouTube tricks. That is not the zone for hoping a thicker oil will save the day. That is not the zone for throwing additives at the car and pretending that counts as diagnosis. That is the zone for proper mechanical testing and a real conversation about whether the engine needs repair, replacement, or a decision about the future of the car, and there is no shame in that. Some engines are worn out. Some really do need major work. But the mistake is not finding out that the engine is bad. The mistake is paying for major repair before you earned that conclusion. That's the difference. This method is not about denying bad news. It's about making sure you only pay for bad news when the engine has actually proved it. So if you remember nothing else from this video, remember this. An engine that uses oil is not automatically a dead engine. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the wear is real. Sometimes the numbers will prove the hard parts are gone, and no cheap method is going to change that. But a lot of drivers lose money long before they ever get to that point. They lose money because they panic. They lose money because they skip the order. They lose money because somebody gives them the most expensive explanation first, and they never stop to ask whether the engine actually earned that diagnosis. That is why this method matters. Not because it's magic, not because it turns worn metal back into new metal, and not because every oil-burning car can be saved with one cheap part and a fresh oil fill. It matters because it forces you to slow down and think in the right sequence. First, check the breathing path. Then, read the smoke honestly. Then, verify the oil before blaming the engine. And only after that do you move into compression, leak down, and the deeper conversation. That's the real value here. You stop guessing, you stop getting pushed around by fear, and you stop paying for major repairs before the engine has actually proved it needs them. Because in the real world, the difference between a car that lasts and a car that gets sold off too early is often not luck. It's diagnosis. It's catching the small cause before it turns into a big bill. It's knowing when to fix, when to monitor, and when to stop pretending and test the engine for real. That's how people keep good cars on the road longer. That's how they avoid unnecessary rebuilds. And that's how they stop turning moderate oil consumption into a financial disaster. If your car is using oil right now, start with the 3 steps. Check the PCV path. Watch the cold start pattern. Verify the oil that's actually in the engine. Then track the result like a grown mechanic, not like a gambler. And if you want, drop your car model, mileage, and how much oil it's using between changes in the comments. That will tell me whether you're probably in the fix it now, monitor it, or shop now zone. Every script, edit, and voiceover on this channel is crafted with real human expertise, not mass-produced content. If this helped you, subscribe for more.